He raised his fist at the wrong woman. He thought he was standing in his own kitchen, staring down the wife he had spent 4 years breaking into silence. He thought the bruise on her face was proof of his dominance. He thought the dark, still house and the pouring Texas rain meant he had already won. He was wrong on every single count. My name is Cassidy Reeves. Everyone in my unit calls me Cass. I'm 34 years old. I'm a former Army Civil Affairs and Intelligence Specialist, and I have neutralized threats in environments that would make most people's nightmares feel like a warm vacation. But the most dangerous operation I ever ran didn't happen overseas. It happened in a 12,000 square foot River Oaks mansion in Houston, Texas, wearing my twin sister's clothes, with her bruise painted onto my face, waiting in the dark for a man who had no idea what was about to walk into his life. This is the story of how I dismantled a predator, a fraud, and a family piece by piece, from the inside out. Before I go any further, I need you to understand something. I didn't come home looking for a mission. I was on a rare stretch of authorized leave after 18 months of rotating deployments. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sleep past 5 in the morning. I wanted to eat food that didn't come in a vacuum-sealed pouch. I had exactly 2 weeks, and my plan was to spend them doing absolutely nothing meaningful. That plan lasted about 36 hours. It was a Wednesday night, late, and the rain was hammering the roof of the Airbnb I'd rented near Midtown when my burner phone rang. I keep a burner for family because my primary line runs through military-grade encryption, and I don't give that number to anyone who hasn't signed a security clearance. When the burner rings at 11:15 at night, it's never good news. It was my twin sister, Marin. I knew something was catastrophically wrong before she finished her first sentence. In intelligence work, you develop what some people call a sixth sense, but it's not mystical. It's pattern recognition. You learn to hear the difference between someone who is afraid and someone who has passed through fear into a place where fear stops being useful. Marin wasn't afraid. She was somewhere much further down than that. She asked me to meet her at a gas station diner on the south side of Highway 59. Not her neighborhood. Not anywhere near the gleaming private zip codes of River Oaks where she and her husband, Warren, lived. Somewhere no one from her world would ever go. I told her I'd be there in 20 minutes. I was there in 14. She was already inside, sitting in the last booth with her back against the wall and both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't touched. Marin and I are identical twins, which means we share the same face, the same height, the same voice, when we're both tired or both scared. But, sitting across from her that night, we could not have looked more different. I was in dark, tactical denim, combat boots, and a canvas jacket. Marin was wrapped in a camel wool coat that cost more than my first car, a silk scarf pulled tight around her throat, and oversized sunglasses pushed up onto her head, even though we were indoors in the dark at nearly midnight. I didn't say hello. My training doesn't leave much room for social warm-ups when someone's respiratory rate is visibly elevated and their hands are trembling hard enough to rattle the silverware. I said, "Take off the sunglasses, Marin." She looked at me the way people look at a doctor before a hard diagnosis, like she both needed to hear it and desperately didn't. Then she reached up and pulled them off, and I felt something shift in my chest that I haven't felt since I watched a member of my unit get carried out of a compound on a stretcher. The bruising around her left eye was severe, deep purple near the socket bleeding into an angry swollen yellow along the cheekbone. I've been trained in trauma assessment. I know exactly the velocity and angle of impact required to produce that specific pattern. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fall. This was a calculated, deliberate strike from someone who knew which angle hurt the most and wanted her to remember it every time she looked in a mirror. I kept my voice completely level, calm as a tool. Warren did this. She nodded. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told me everything. He'd come home drunk the night before. She'd made a mistake, she'd confronted him. She'd found evidence on his personal tablet, text messages with a woman named Priya, a private equity contact, conversations about moving significant money into offshore accounts, conversations about what they were going to do once the divorce was finalized. When Marin told him she wanted out, He walked her backward into the hallway and told her exactly what leaving would cost her. He had taken out large credit lines in her name without her knowledge. He had been systematically moving assets. He told her she would walk away with nothing but debt and a destroyed reputation. He told her their parents would never forgive her for blowing up the family's most important financial relationship. Then he struck her. And then, almost calmly, he told her she was nothing without his money. I sat back and let the full picture settle. If you have ever sat across a table from someone you love and watched them describe their own cage in perfect detail, listing the locks, the bars, the exits that were sealed before they even thought to run, you know the specific kind of grief that produces in your chest. It doesn't feel like anger at first. It feels like weight. Just absolute, suffocating weight. But here's what Maren didn't know yet. I wasn't just her sister anymore. I was the asset he'd never accounted for. I asked her what I already knew the answer to. Have you told Mom and Dad? She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She'd gone to their house that morning, the enormous Tanglewood home our parents had owned for 25 years, the one with the circular driveway and the manicured hedges, and the painting of a hunting scene in the foyer that always made me feel like a trespasser. Our mother Gloria had taken one look at Maren's face and told her to put some ice on it and stop being dramatic. Our father, Richard, had pulled her into his study and explained, in the measured tone of a man discussing quarterly projections, that Warren's investment firm was the primary financial backer for his pending commercial real estate expansion. If Maren caused a scandal, Richard's deal collapsed. If his deal collapsed, they lost everything. He told Maren she was going to go home, apologize, and be a better wife. He told her she was going to end up a disgraceful outcast, just like me, if she didn't get herself together. There it was. I need to stop here for a second, because I want to be honest with you about what this moment felt like. I have been called the family outcast since I was 17 years old. I enlisted right out of high school, chose what my mother described as a rough, masculine, undignified life, and was basically erased from the family narrative when I did. I wasn't invited to Sunday dinners. I wasn't mentioned at parties. My name was a source of embarrassment, not pride. Maren was the golden child, compliant, beautiful, married to a wealthy man, performing the exact version of womanhood my parents worshipped. And now I was watching that same system grind her into powder. They had traded their golden child for financial security, and the man they handed her to was destroying both. Warren, made a critical tactical error. He forgot about the outcast. I reached across the table and took Maren's shaking hands in mine. Mine were completely still. You're not going back to that house tonight, I told her. I am. It took me 4 minutes to talk her out of panicking. It took another 3 to outline the plan. I had a trusted squad mate from my former unit who lived 40 minutes north of the city, a woman named Torres who kept a property off the grid, no registered address, no connection to anything in Maren's social world. Within 60 seconds of a secure text, Torres confirmed she could pick Maren up from the back of this diner and have her somewhere safe within the hour. The rest of the plan was simpler than it sounds, and far more dangerous than it looked on paper. Maren and I share the same face. We have the same hands, the same jawline, the same voice, when we're both trying to sound like we're not terrified. We have been swapping places since we were 9 years old. We swapped for a high school chemistry final. We swapped at a college entrance interview. We swapped once, years ago, to help her avoid a first date she'd accidentally double-booked. Tonight, we were swapping to save her life. We locked ourselves in the diner restroom. She stripped off the expensive coat, the silk blouse, the tailored trousers, and I handed her my tactical clothes, the worn jacket, the boots, the dark denim. She looked like herself wearing armor for the first time. I pulled on the expensive fabric and felt immediately how constrictive it was. Not just physically, spiritually. This was the costume of a woman who had been trained to take up less space. Then came the most important part. I opened my go bag and pulled out my field camouflage kit. I've used those paints in desert environments, in jungle terrain, in low visibility night operations, where the wrong color against your skin could get you killed. I've painted myself invisible 100 times. Tonight, I was painting myself visible in the specific way that mattered most. I studied Marin's bruise, the exact geography of it, the broken capillaries near the tear duct, the yellow-green fade along the cheekbone, the angry red edge near the brow. Then I turned to the mirror and rebuilt it on my own face with surgical precision. When I turned to show her, Marin pressed both hands over her mouth. Looking at me was like looking into a nightmare she'd been living alone. "You're safe now," I told her, and I meant it with everything in my body. "Go with Torres. Don't answer your phone, don't check your email. Sleep. I'm going to handle your husband." Torres pulled up in the alley. Marin held me for 3 seconds longer than she probably intended to. Then she was gone, and I was walking through the rain toward her luxury SUV, her key fob in my hand, her bruise on my face, heading toward a confrontation with a man who had no idea the entire board had just flipped. I drove toward River Oaks the way I approach any hostile insertion. Methodically, I visualized the layout of the house from Marin's descriptions. Entry points, sight lines, environmental advantages. I parked in the driveway as the last light faded from the Houston sky, let myself in with her key, and walked directly to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood behind the marble island, still and completely silent, and I waited. Honestly, that wait was peaceful. I've waited in far worse places. The garage door rolled open just after 9. I tracked his footsteps uneven, too heavy, sliding slightly on the mudroom tile. He was drunk. The hallway door banged against the wall hard enough to leave a mark. The smell of bourbon and expensive cigars preceded him into the kitchen by a full 10 seconds. He hit the lights, flooding the room, and found me standing exactly where I'd positioned myself. Motionless, unhurried, watching him. He stopped. He'd expected a cowering woman. He expected flinching. He expected the performance of submission he'd been conditioning her toward for 4 years. What he found instead was someone standing with her shoulders squared, her breathing regulated, her eyes entirely steady. He didn't understand it, but his body understood before his brain did. I watched it register across his face, the confusion curdling into something uglier. He crossed the kitchen toward me, telling me I was pathetic, that I was nothing, that her parents had already chosen him over her, that she had nowhere to go and nothing without him. His voice kept escalating. I said nothing. Silence is one of the most effective interrogation tools in existence. It makes arrogant people fill the void with exactly what they're most afraid of. He stepped around the island. He drew his arm back. He telegraphed the strike the way completely untrained fighters always do, dropping the shoulder, shifting his weight to the back foot, winding up for the swing. It was a sloppy, ego-driven punch aimed directly at the painted bruise on my cheek. He wanted the satisfaction of impact. He never got close. I stepped inside his reach before his fist completed half its arc. I raised my left forearm in a deflecting block that redirected his wrist sharply upward, sending a shockwave up his arm and stopping his momentum entirely. Then I grabbed his extended wrist with my left hand, rotated it outward to lock the joint, and drove the palm of my right hand directly into his exposed elbow. The sound in that kitchen was not quiet. A loud, wet pop echoed off the marble countertops. Warren's face went completely white. A scream came out of him that had no dignity in it whatsoever. His knees buckled. I swept his legs out from under him, and he hit that expensive marble floor like a man who had never once imagined the floor could reach up and claim him. I had my knee in his chest before he could process what had happened. 5 years of terrorizing a woman who trusted him. 5 seconds to end it. I'm not going to pretend I felt bad about it. While he lay there trying to remember how to breathe, I noticed a glow on the floor about 3 feet away. His phone had slid out of his pocket when he fell, screen lit, unlocked. He'd been mid-conversation when he walked in. He'd been too drunk and too arrogant to lock it. I reached out and picked it up. The contact name at the top of the open thread read, Priya, followed by a small red heart emoji. The most recent message was a notification banner sitting front and center. I read it once, Then I read it again. The $200K credit line in her name just cleared. She won't know until the papers hit. I scrolled up. What I found in that thread was not the record of an affair. It was a blueprint. Warren and Priya had been engineering a coordinated financial assassination for months. He was moving his legitimate assets offshore to appear insolvent for a divorce settlement. She was using her position at a private wealth bank to push through massive loans under Marin's forged identity. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. By the time the divorce papers arrived, Marin would owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal bank debt she'd never authorized. Her credit would be obliterated, and Warren would walk away wealthy and untouchable. He had built a trap with no exit. He'd miscalculated one thing. The person he'd built it for wasn't the person holding his phone right now. I looked down at him. He was sweating through his expensive shirt, staring up at me with something new in his eyes. Not rage anymore. Fear. Genuine, unfiltered, primal fear. He still thought I was Marin. He thought his submissive wife had experienced some kind of catastrophic break. I pocketed the phone. At the private River Oaks emergency clinic 20 minutes later, I performed the most complete character transformation of my life. The soldier evaporated. In her place emerged a trembling, devoted, frantic wife who'd watched her husband fall down a flight of stairs and couldn't stop apologizing for every rug in their house. I pitched my voice to match Marin's precise cadence, widened my eyes with manufactured tears, and stood in the corner of his trauma bay wringing my hands like a woman who had never in her life defended herself from anything. Warren sat in the hospital bed, pale and medicated, watching me perform his wife with perfect fidelity, and he could not do a single thing about it. I won't drag you through every detail of what happened next, but I want you to understand something. The moment those pain medications hit his bloodstream, and my parents arrived at the hospital walking past the painted bruise on my face without a single word about it, rushing directly to Warren's bedside with their hands outstretched, something crystallized in me that I had been trying to feel since I was 17 years old. My parents were not uninformed. They were not naive. They knew. They had always known. And they had made their choice. My father pulled me into the hospital corridor and told me, his voice low and savage, that I would go back into that room, smile, and be a perfect wife. He looked directly at the bruise on my face and told me to clean myself up. He told me not to stress Warren out. He told me that if I ruined his funding, I would end up with nothing, just like my sister Cassidy, meaning me, the outcast, the soldier, the disgrace. Standing in that hallway, I realized something. He had just threatened his own daughter with the fate of becoming me, and he had no idea he was looking me in the face. I went back inside. I smiled. I thanked the doctor. I loaded Warren into the passenger seat of his SUV and drove him home, and at 4 a.m, after he'd passed out on narcotics, I extracted every piece of digital evidence from his phone onto my encrypted military laptop. I cloned his entire financial existence offshore routing numbers, shell corporations registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands, forged authorization codes tied directly to Marin's stolen identity. Then I did something Warren never anticipated. I walked into his bank. The private wealth management branch on Post Oak Boulevard was the kind of institution that required a 7-figure minimum just to open an account. I walked in wearing Marin's clothes, carrying Marin's ID, using pins I'd extracted from Warren's data cache, and I told the receptionist I was the anxious, overwhelmed wife of an injured client who desperately needed to review the paperwork on some recent loans she didn't fully understand. The receptionist was sympathetic. The loan officer who came to the private lounge to assist me was not just sympathetic. She was Priya. I recognized her instantly from the photo on Warren's phone. Sharp suit, severe bun, the kind of smile that's actually a calculation. She sat down across from me and spread the forged loan documents across the glass table with the confidence of a woman who believed she was looking at a lamb walking calmly toward the slaughterhouse. I let her explain everything. I asked exactly the right questions to make myself sound confused. When she pushed a routing acknowledgement form toward me and handed me a pen, I set the pen down and told her, trembling, that I couldn't possibly sign anything without Warren's approval. He got so upset when I interfered with his finances and with his injury. I didn't want to stress him. The flash of irritation across her face was almost imperceptible. Almost. She printed me a full certified copy of everything and sent me on my way with a condescending smile and a promise to see me tomorrow morning with the signed form. I sat in the underground parking garage, with those documents spread across my lap, cross-referencing them against Warren's cloned data, and that's when I found it. The piece I hadn't seen coming. The collateral used to secure the largest fraudulent loan in Marin's name wasn't tied to Warren's personal holdings. It was registered to my father's commercial real estate company. Warren hadn't just been stealing from Marin. He'd been bleeding Richard dry for 8 months, using his position as primary investor to siphon the operational capital into his shell companies, and he'd used my sister's stolen identity as the final trigger for a cascading default that would seize every property my father owned. Warren wasn't just going to destroy Marin on Friday. He was going to financially annihilate my parents at the same time, and they had been protecting him so thoroughly, so completely, so desperately that they would never see it coming. I called in a favor from the best cyber specialist in my former unit, a woman named Torres, who owed me from a very bad night in a very bad place and had never once asked for the details back. I transmitted the entire clone data package over a secure line. She mapped the full network in under 2 hours and came back with a verdict. This wasn't a single fraud. It was a 4-year embezzlement operation with multiple victims. Several of Warren's wealthiest Houston clients were bleeding money without knowing it. Federal prosecutors, she told me, dream about cases this clean. Everything I needed was now secured. The physical paper trail, the digital evidence, the time-stamped text messages, the offshore routing codes, all of it bulletproof. I had 48 hours until Friday. Warren called me Thursday afternoon from his office, his voice back to its full, comfortable arrogance. He told me there was a children's hospital charity gala Friday night at the Intercontinental downtown, one of those events where Houston's most powerful people come to applaud each other and write checks. He said I would meet him there at 7, I would wear the navy beaded gown, I would keep my mouth shut, and I would publicly apologize to him in front of my parents for my hysterical breakdown. He also told me, his voice dropping into the register he used when he wanted someone to feel truly afraid, that while he was at the hospital, he'd had his legal team file for an emergency 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold on his wife. The paperwork was already signed by a judge. Lawyers would be at the gala, waiting to serve me the moment the evening turned. By the time I was released, he'd have the divorce finalized, the fraud locked in, and Marin buried under federal debt she couldn't explain. He said, "Tick-tock." He had no idea I was smiling. I spent Friday afternoon preparing. I am not a vain person. I own approximately 3 items of jewelry, and have been known to forget to eat lunch, but I understand the psychological architecture of a costume. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Marin's apartment, and I rebuilt the bruise on my face, darker this time, more deliberate. I was going to walk into that gala wearing the physical evidence of 4 years of abuse as a war flag, not a wound. Inside my evening clutch, I tucked a miniature encrypted audio transmitter, precinct to Torres, who was standing by in a secure location with access to the hotel's AV system, a detail she had arranged through her own contacts, details I will leave deliberately vague. Warren met me at the venue entrance, arm in its medical sling, custom tuxedo immaculate, his fake brave smile already performing for the photographers. He offered his good arm to walk me inside. I took it. I could feel him trembling slightly, and I knew it wasn't from the painkillers. He was scared of me. He just didn't know why yet. The ballroom was everything Houston high society worships: crystal chandeliers, orchid centerpieces, waitstaff in white jackets, the city's most powerful people arranged around circular tables performing wealth at each other. My parents were already seated near the front. My mother looked at the bruise on my face and hissed that I was embarrassing the family. My father grabbed my arm and told me to smile and stay quiet and not ruin this evening the way I ruined everything. I told him, I promise you, tonight everyone will see exactly what they need to see. He frowned. I sat down. I spotted Warren's lawyers immediately, 2 men in charcoal suits stationed near the emergency exit. Not mingling, not drinking champagne, holding a thick envelope and watching me, with the predatory patience of men who'd been paid very well to wait. Then the lights dimmed. Warren took the stage. He was extraordinary at this. I'll give him that. He spoke into the microphone with the voice of a man in genuine pain, performing sacrifice for the greater good. He talked about the hospital. He talked about his injury. He talked, voice-breaking, with what sounded like authentic grief, about his beloved wife's deteriorating mental health and the impossible, heartbreaking decision he'd been forced to make for everyone's safety. He looked directly at my table. He gave a small nod toward the back of the room. The lawyers began moving down the aisle. I stood up. My mother grabbed for my wrist. She caught nothing. I walked down the center of that ballroom the way I walk into any hostile environment, chin up, shoulders squared, pace controlled, breathing regulated. The crowd parted. Not because they wanted to, because something in my posture told every instinct in the room to get out of the way. I walked up the stage stairs. Warren took a step back. He gripped the podium. His eyes were doing something complicated that I enjoyed watching for exactly 1 second, before I closed my hand around the microphone stand and applied light but precise pressure to his immobilized shoulder until he released it. He hissed. He stepped aside. I looked out at 500 of the most powerful people in Houston, Texas. I took a breath. And then I told them everything. I told them about the forged loans. I told them about Priya and the offshore accounts. I told them about the text messages. I pressed the transmitter in my clutch twice, and the massive screens behind me went dark, then blazed back to life with the evidence. Loan documents, wire transfers, text message threads, the specific message where Warren joked about using my father's company as collateral and called Richard an old fool who didn't know he was already bankrupt. I watched my father's face when that one appeared on screen. I've witnessed a lot of things in my career. I've been in rooms where terrible things were confirmed. I have never seen a human being age a decade in the span of 4 seconds before that moment. Warren lunged for me. He actually raised his hand on a stage in front of every camera in the room, in front of 500 witnesses, and tried to shut me up the same way he'd been shutting Marin up for 4 years. I stepped back, reached into my clutch, and pulled out a makeup wipe. I held his gaze. I brought the cloth to my cheek, one firm stroke across the painted bruise, and it came away on the white fabric in a purple and yellow smear, leaving behind completely unblemished skin. No bruise, no trauma, no victim. Marin isn't here tonight, I said into the microphone, my voice ringing through every speaker in that ballroom. Marin is at the Houston field office right now, with a team of federal investigators who are very excited about the evidence package she brought them. My name is Cassidy Reeves. I'm her identical twin sister. I spent the last 4 years deployed overseas. I paused. And you have a terrible right hook. The room erupted. Warren tried to run. He made it 4 steps across the stage before my leg caught his ankle with a combat sweep I have executed in far less forgiving environments. He went airborne. He landed hard on his dislocated shoulder for the 2nd time in 48 hours, and the sound that came out of him when that joint separated again was so spectacular, so complete, so perfectly suited to a room full of people who had watched him perform invincibility for years, that for one single moment there was absolute silence. Then the federal agents came through the doors. His lawyers dropped the psychiatric hold papers on a cocktail table and left through the side exit without a word. The agents cuffed him on the floor of the stage. He was arraigned the following morning. Denied bail. The judge cited his offshore accounts and his obvious flight risk. His legal team quit when his assets were frozen. He was assigned a public defender who, upon reviewing the evidence package Torres had transmitted directly to federal prosecutors, reportedly advised him to enter a guilty plea before the discovery phase made things considerably worse. He is currently serving a federal sentence. The orange jumpsuit, I'm told, is not tailored. Priya lost her banking license within the week. She attempted to cooperate with prosecutors and blame Warren for everything. The digital record of her own enthusiasm for the scheme made that argument difficult to sustain. She is facing her own federal charges. The bank voided every fraudulent loan tied to Marin's identity. Wiped clean. Zero balance. The aggressive civil suit Marin filed, handled by the most ruthless divorce attorney in Texas, liquidated Warren's remaining legitimate assets before the government could claim them. Marin walked away with enough financial independence to build an entirely new life on her own terms. 3 months later, I was sitting on the couch in that new life, a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and 24-hour security when the intercom buzzed. The concierge's voice came through apologetic and clearly stressed. 2 people were in the lobby. They claimed to be her parents. They'd followed a delivery driver through the security gate. They were asking to come up. Marin looked at me across the sunlit room. She pressed the intercom button. "Send them up," she said, completely calm, completely certain. My parents arrived looking like a photograph left in the sun, too long, faded, distorted, small in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. My father's suit was off the rack and badly pressed. My mother's hair was unset, her perfume replaced by the very specific scent of desperation. The foreclosure had processed the previous month. Donald Richards' commercial real estate portfolio had been seized to cover the default Priya's loan had triggered. Every property, every asset, everything he'd spent 30 years assembling. They stood in the hallway and wept. They called Marin their daughter. They talked about flesh and blood and family loyalty. They asked for a loan, just a small loan, just enough to get back on their feet. Marin let them finish. Then she said, in a voice so level it could have been carved from stone, "I don't have money to support you. You need to learn to be independent. I wouldn't want to stress you out." The exact words, the exact tone, the ones they'd used against her in a hospital corridor, word for word, delivered back to them with surgical precision. She closed the door. The deadbolt turned. She didn't lean against it and cry. She walked back to the kitchen, picked up her coffee, and took a sip like she'd just returned from checking the mail. "I've run operations in 8 countries. I've extracted people from impossible situations. I've sat in rooms where the outcome could go any number of directions, and I've had to choose the right one in the space of a second. But watching my sister close that door, watching her reclaim the specific language they weaponized against her and return it, quietly and exactly, that was the most complete and perfect operation I have ever witnessed. Here's what this story taught me, and I mean this in the most practical sense possible. Predators rarely operate alone. They need enabling systems, people who benefit from the abuse, institutions that look the other way, family members who choose comfort over protection. When those systems are dismantled along with the predator, the victory is complete. When they're left standing, the cycle simply finds a new host. The mistake most people make is thinking they need to win in the room where the abuse happened. You don't. You need to win in the room where the evidence is. You need to win in the room where the truth can't be managed, spun, or silenced. The moment Marin walked into that federal office with Torres and laid the complete digital package on an agent's desk, the outcome was already decided. Everything else, the gala, the stage, the moment I wiped off the bruise, that was just the announcement. If you have ever been told you were unstable for naming something real, if you have ever watched someone choose money over your safety, if you have ever been handed silence when you deserved protection, I want you to know that your clarity is not a breakdown. Your anger is not hysteria. Your refusal to accept the unacceptable is not a character flaw. It's a survival instinct. Honor it. The self-reflection question I want to leave you with is this. Is there a door in your life you haven't closed yet, not because you can't, but because you've been told you don't have the right to? You have the right. Now, before you go, I want to know what you think. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think Marin made the right choice closing that door on her parents. Drop a 2 if you think she should have given them a chance to make it right. Drop a 3 if you think what I did at that gala was too far, and I can take the feedback. Also, tell me where you're watching from. and what time it is there right now. I read every single comment. And if you have ever had to extract yourself from a situation where the people who were supposed to protect you chose their own comfort instead, share your story below. You might be the exact reason someone else finally feels less alone tonight. If this story moved you, if you felt Marin's relief when that door closed, if you felt even a fraction of the satisfaction of watching a predator face real consequences, hit that like button, because it tells me this kind of storytelling matters. And subscribe, because I have more stories of survival, justice, and reclaiming what belongs to you. Every single one of them is worth your time. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.